Hey there. If you're settling in, looking for something slow and steady to ease you into sleep, you've found the right place. Tonight, we're not chasing adventure or glory. We're descending into the dark, damp, and relentless world of a 19th century miner. No romance, no heroics. Just the grind of men and women clawing at the earth for coal, iron, or whatever else the ground might yield. This is history stripped bare, heavy with dust and sweat, where every day tested your lungs, your back, and your will to keep going. If this kind of grounded, unhurried storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely calms you. Drop a comment to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. It's oddly comforting to picture who else is out there, drifting off with you. So, dim the lights, pull up a blanket, maybe put on some white noise for that soft hum. Let's sink into the shadows of the 1800s, where the earth swallowed dreams and spat out coal. Let's begin. You didn't choose to be a miner. The world chose it for you. Maybe your father was one, or your village sat on a seam of coal that decided everyone's fate. In the 1800s, mining wasn't just a job. It was a sentence. You woke before dawn, not because you were eager, but because the mine didn't care about your sleep. The air was cold, sharp, biting at your knuckles as you pulled on boots already worn thin. Your home, if you could call it that, was a cramped cottage or a company-owned shack. Walls thin as promises, letting in drafts that carried the smell of soot and yesterday's stew. You grabbed your tin lunch pail, bread, maybe a bit of cheese, or if you were lucky, a scrap of bacon fat to spread on a crust. No time for a proper meal. The mine was waiting, and it wasn't patient. The walk to the pit was quiet, save for the crunch of frost or mud underfoot. You'd see others, shadows in the pre-dawn gloom, moving the same way, heads down, shoulders hunched, carrying picks, shovels, or just the weight of another day. The mine's entrance loomed like a mouth, black and uninviting, framed by timbers that creaked under the earth's weight. You didn't pause to look at it. You'd seen it 1,000 times. Instead, you lit your lamp, a tallow candle if you were poor, a Davy lamp if the mine was modern and the boss cared about safety, which was rare. The flame flickered, barely pushing back the dark, but it was all you had to guide you into the earth. Descending was its own kind of ritual. If you were in a coal mine in Britain or Pennsylvania, you might climb down a ladder, hands slipping on wet rungs, the air growing heavier with every step. In deeper mines, you'd cram into a cage, a rickety iron box that rattled as it dropped, powered by a steam engine that hissed like it resented the job. The cage swayed, groaned, and sometimes stopped mid-descent, leaving you dangling in the dark, heart pounding, wondering if the cable would snap. It usually didn't, but the thought never left you. By the time you reached the bottom, your legs were steady, but your mind wasn't. The mine was a different world, damp, cold, and close, like being buried alive with permission. The tunnels were low, forcing you to stoop, your back aching before the shift even started. Coal dust coated everything, your hands, your face, your lungs. It wasn't just dirt. It was a living thing, settling into your skin, turning your spit black. If you were in a metal mine, say iron or copper in Cornwall or Michigan, the walls might gleam with but they were just as unforgiving. Rocks jutted out, catching your elbows, your head, your pride. Water dripped constantly, pooling at your feet, turning the floor to sludge. You didn't slip if you were smart, but everyone slipped sometimes. Your tools were simple, brutal. A pickaxe, heavy and unforgiving, its handle worn smooth by hands before yours. A shovel, maybe a wedge to pry loose, stubborn rock. If you were lucky, you had a partner, someone to share the load, but more often you worked alone, swinging the pick in a rhythm that was less about skill and more about survival. The sound was constant, metal on stone, stone on stone, the distant echo of someone else's labor. Every swing jarred your arms, your shoulders, your spine. You didn't think about it. You just swung again. The air was the real enemy. In coal mines, it was thick with dust and gas, methane, or fire damp. As they called it, invisible but deadly. One spark from a candle, one wrong move, and the whole tunnel could go up in flames. The Davy lamp helped, its wire mesh keeping the flame from igniting the gas. But it wasn't foolproof. You'd heard stories of entire crews burned or suffocated, their bodies pulled out blackened or not pulled out at all. In metal mines, the air was cleaner but colder, seeping into your bones, making every joint ache like you were twice your age. Ventilation was a luxury, and most mines didn't have it. You breathed what you got and you coughed up what you could. The work itself was endless. In coal mines, you hacked at the seam, prying loose chunks that tumbled into baskets or carts. If you were a hewer, you worked the coal face, cutting it free with your pick, your body bent double, sweat mixing with dust to form a gritty paste on your skin. If you were a hurrier, you dragged the coal away, crawling through tunnels too low for standing, a leather strap around your forehead pulling a loaded sled. Women and children often did this job, their smaller bodies fitting better in the tight spaces. It wasn't mercy, it was economics. Smaller meant cheaper, and the mine owners cared more about profit than people. You didn't work for yourself. You worked for the company or the lord or whoever owned the mineral rights. Pay was in wages if you were lucky, or in script, company money only good at the company store where prices were high and options were low. A day's work might earn you enough for bread, rent, and a candle to see you through the next shift. If you were in a good mine, you got paid by the ton. If you were in a bad one, you got paid by the day, no matter how little you pulled out. And there were always deductions. Rent for the shack, tools you broke, fines for being late or looking at the foreman wrong. Danger was everywhere. Cave-ins were common, timbers buckling under the earth's weight, rocks falling without warning. You learned to listen for the creaks, the groans, the subtle shifts that meant run. Sometimes you heard them in time, sometimes you didn't. Explosions were worse, gas igniting or dust catching fire, turning the tunnel into a furnace. Floods happened, too, water breaking through from some underground spring, cold and relentless, filling the shafts faster than you could climb. And then there were the small injuries, cuts, bruises, fingers crushed by a misplaced swing. They didn't kill you, but they made every day harder, slower, more painful. By noon, if you were lucky, you'd stop to eat. You sat on the tunnel floor, back against the wall, and opened your pail. The bread was stale, the cheese hard, but it was fuel. You ate fast, not because you were hungry, though you were, but because the break was short and the foreman's whistle was never far off. You didn't talk much. Words took energy, and you needed every bit for the next 6 hours. The dark pressed in, your lamp's flame a small rebellion against it, and you wondered, not for the first time, if the sun was still up there somewhere. The afternoon stretched on, each hour heavier than the last. You were back at the coal face or the vein, pickaxe biting into the earth, each strike a small argument with the ground. The rhythm was hypnotic, numbing, but it didn't dull the ache in your shoulders or the sting of blisters forming under your calluses. The mind didn't care about your pain. It didn't care about anything. It was just there, endless and indifferent, swallowing your effort like it swallowed the light. You kept going because stopping wasn't an option. The foreman was always watching, or worse, the tallyman who counted your output and decided if you'd eat tomorrow. Every chunk of coal or lump of, or was a coin you didn't have yet, a debt you were always paying. The dark played tricks on you. Shadows flickered in the lamplight, making you think you saw movement where there was none. Sometimes it was just the walls shifting slightly under the weight above. Sometimes it was a rat scuttling through the sludge, its eyes catching the light like tiny accusations. You didn't scream, screaming was for greenhorns, but you flinched and you hated yourself for it. The old-timers, the ones with black-stained lungs and eyes like chipped flint, didn't flinch. They'd seen it all. Cave-ins, floods, men who went into the dark and never came out. They didn't talk about it, not because they were brave, but because words didn't change the mine. If you were in a coal mine, the air grew thicker as the day wore on. Fire damp wasn't just a morning threat. It lingered, waiting for a spark or a moment of carelessness. You'd check your lamp, its flame low and blue if gas was near, a warning you couldn't ignore. Some mines had firemen, men who went in before the shift, crawling through the tightest tunnels with a long pole to burn off the gas. They were brave or desperate, usually both, and half the time they didn't come back. You didn't thank them. You just nodded and got to work, knowing they'd risk their lives so you could risk yours. In metal mines, the danger was different but no less real. The walls were sharper, the rocks heavier. Iron or didn't crumble like coal. It fought back, dulling your tools, bruising your hands. Copper mines were wetter, the water seeping from every crack, turning the tunnels into a maze of mud and misery. You'd slip, curse, and keep swinging, because the quota didn't care about your wet boots or the cold that settled into your bones. If you were lucky, the vein was rich and you'd hit your mark early. If you weren't, you'd be there until your lamp burned out, and then you'd work by feel, hands bleeding in the dark. Children were everywhere, scurrying like ghosts. Boys as young as 8 hauled coal or carried tools, their faces smudged, their eyes too old for their bodies. Girls, too, sometimes dragging sleds or sorting or at the surface. They didn't complain, not out loud. They'd learned early that the mind didn't care about tears any more than it cared about dreams. You'd see a kid stumble, drop a load, and you'd want to help, but you couldn't. Your own quota was waiting, and the foreman didn't take kindly to charity. The kids learned fast or they didn't last. It wasn't cruel. It was just the way things were. The foremen were a breed apart. Some were miners once, hardened by years underground, their sympathy worn away like the soles of their boots. Others were company men, clean-shaven, with coats that didn't smell of coal. They carried sticks or whips not to use often, but to remind you they could. They'd shout orders, their voices echoing down the tunnels, sharp and final. Move faster. That seam's not done. You didn't argue. Arguing got you docked, or worse, sent to the worst seams, the one so low you had to crawl, so dusty you choked with every breath. You kept your head down and your pick moving. The company store was its own kind of trap. If you were paid in scrip, you had no choice but to shop there. Bread cost twice what it should. Candles were a luxury, not a necessity, according to the clerk who smirked when you asked for credit. You'd hand over your earnings, watch them vanish into a ledger, and walk away with just enough to get through the week. If you were in debt, and most were, the store took everything. You'd hear stories of miners working months without a penny to show, their wages eaten by rent, tools, and overpriced flour. The store wasn't a service. It was a leash. By late afternoon, your body was screaming. Your hands were raw, your back bent like a bow. The lamp was dimming, its fuel running low, and the dark seemed to press closer, heavier. You didn't think about home, not yet. Home was too far away, too soft a thought for the mind. You thought about the next swing, the next load, the next breath. You counted the minutes until the whistle blew, signaling the end of the shift. But even then, you weren't free. The climb out was as brutal as the climb in, your legs shaking, your lungs burning with dust. If you were in a cage, you'd cram in with the others, bodies pressed close, smelling of sweat and earth. If you were on a ladder, you'd climb, rung by rung, each step a small victory over the mind's pull. When you finally reached the surface, the light hurt. The sun, if it was still up, was too bright, too clean. You squinted, coughed, spat black into the dirt. The air was cold but fresh, a shock after the stale damp of the tunnels. You didn't linger. You walked home, the weight of the day still on you, your tools slung over your shoulder, your pail empty. The village was quiet, the other miners already home or still underground. You didn't talk about the day. What was there to say? It was the same as yesterday, the same as tomorrow. At home, you'd wash if you had the energy. A bucket of cold water, a rag, maybe a bit of soap if you could afford it. The coal dust didn't come off easily. It clung like a second skin. You'd scrub until your hands were red, but your nails stayed black, your face streaked. Supper was waiting, if you were lucky, pottage, thick with barley or beans, maybe a crust of bread. You ate in silence, the fire crackling, the room too small for the family crammed inside. Your wife or mother might ask how the day was. You'd grunt, shrug. The mine wasn't something you explained. It was something you survived. Sleep came fast, but it wasn't restful. Your body ached, your cough lingered, and the dark of the mine followed you into your dreams. You'd see tunnels, hear the creak of timbers, feel the weight of rock above you. Sometimes you'd wake, gasping, sure the ceiling was caving in. It wasn't, but the fear stayed. You'd lie there, listening to the wind outside, the snores of your children, the faint crackle of the fire. Tomorrow would be the same. You didn't think about it. You just closed your eyes and waited for dawn. Morning came too soon, the cold seeping through the cracks in your cottage before the sun had a chance to try. You woke to the same ache, the same cough, the same weight in your chest that wasn't just dust but the knowledge of where you were headed. The mind waited, patient as death, and you had no choice but to meet it. You pulled on your clothes, stiff, damp, smelling of yesterday's sweat, and grabbed your pail. If you were lucky, there was a bit of porridge left, cold and gluey, but enough to keep you moving. You didn't linger. The walk to the pit was the same, the air sharp, the ground unforgiving. The other miners were there, faces gray in the dawn, eyes dull with the monotony of survival. You didn't greet them, you just fell in step, another shadow heading into the earth. Down below, the mine was the same, yet different every day. A new seam might open, promising more coal or ore, but also new dangers. A timber might have shifted overnight, a puddle grown deeper, a gas pocket formed where none was before. You checked your lamp, adjusted your cap, cloth or leather, never enough to protect your skull from a falling rock, and got to work. The rhythm was familiar, but it never got easier. Each swing of the pick was a theft from your body, stealing strength you couldn't replace. Your hands, already calloused, cracked in the cold, blood mixing with dirt. You didn't stop to clean them. There wasn't time, and the mind didn't care about your wounds. The hierarchy underground was its own kind of law. The hewers, like you if you were skilled, were the backbone, cutting the coal or from the face. You were respected, in a way, but only as much as your output allowed. Below you were the hurriers, often women or children, dragging the heavy baskets through the tunnels. Above you were the deputies, men who checked the timbers, tested for gas, and kept the work moving. They weren't your friends, but they weren't quite your enemies either. They'd warn you of a bad seam or a weak roof, but only if it didn't slow the day's tally. And above them all was the overman, the mine's judge and jury, answerable only to the owners. His word was final, his temper short. Cross him, and you'd find yourself in the worst tunnels, where the air was thickest and the ceiling lowest. The mine wasn't just a workplace. It was a community, twisted and tight. You knew the men beside you, not by their dreams, but by their habits. John, who coughed louder than he spoke. Mary, who could pull a sled faster than any boy but never smiled. Tom, who sang hymns under his breath to keep the dark at bay. You didn't talk much, but you listened. You knew who was slowing down, who was hiding an injury, who might not make it through the week. You didn't say it aloud. That was bad luck. But you saw it in their eyes, the way they moved, the way their lamp trembled in their hand. Accidents were part of the rhythm, as regular as the pick's swing. A rock might fall, small enough to bruise, big enough to break a bone. You'd hear a shout, a thud, then silence. If it was minor, you'd help the man up, bind his wound with a rag, and send him back to work. If it was bad, you'd carry him to the surface, his groans echoing in the cage. Sometimes he'd return the next day, limping but alive. Sometimes he wouldn't. The mine didn't stop for injuries, just like it didn't stop for grief. You'd hear about a collapse in another shaft, a fire in a distant mine, and you'd keep working. It wasn't callous. It was survival. You couldn't afford to mourn when your own quota was waiting. The machinery, if your mine had any, was as dangerous as the earth itself. Steam engines powered the cages and pumps, but they broke down often, hissing and spitting like angry beasts. If you worked the pumps, keeping the water out of the lower levels, you'd spend hours in the wet, your boots rotting, your hands numb. The pumps were vital. Floods could drown a mine faster than fire could burn it, but they were fickle. A broken pump meant water rising, work stopping, wages lost. You'd curse the machine, the company, the mine itself, but you'd keep at it, because the alternative was worse. The animals were another constant. Ponies, small and sturdy, hauled carts in bigger mines. They lived underground, sometimes for years, their eyes pale from the dark, their coats matted with dust. You'd feed them scraps, pat their flanks, but you didn't get attached. They were tools like you, and the mine wore them out just the same. Rats were bolder, stealing crumbs from your lunch pail, darting between your feet. You didn't hate them. They were just part of the mine, like the damp or the dark. Sometimes you'd hear a canary, caged and singing, a warning system for gas. If it stopped, you ran. If it died, you prayed you were fast enough. By evening, the mine felt smaller, the air heavier. Your lamp was nearly out, its light a faint glow against the endless black. You'd lost track of time, but your body knew the shift was ending. Your arms were lead, your back a knot of pain. The whistle blew, a shrill sound that cut through the din of picks and carts. You gathered your tools, checked your basket, and joined the others heading for the cage or ladder. The climb up was slower, each step heavier than the last. You didn't look back. The mine would be there tomorrow, waiting. On the surface, the world felt wrong. The sky was too big, the air too thin. You'd cough, spit, try to shake the dust from your clothes, but it was part of you now. The walk home was silent, your body too tired for words. The village was alive with small sounds. Children shouting, a dog barking, the clatter of a kettle. You didn't notice them much. Your mind was still underground, replaying the day's near misses, the creak of a timber, the flicker of your lamp. At home, you'd eat what was there, pottage again, maybe a potato if the crop was good. You'd sit by the fire, its warmth a faint echo of what you needed. Your family was there, but you didn't talk much. They knew the mine by the way it marked you. Black nails, sunken eyes, a cough that never left. Sleep was a battle. The bed was straw or rags, the blankets thin. You'd lie there, body aching, mind racing. The mine followed you, its shadows creeping into your dreams. You'd see falling rocks, hear muffled screams. Sometimes you'd wake, heart pounding, sure you were still underground. Your wife or child might stir, murmur something, but you wouldn't answer. You'd just wait for the dark to soften, for the first gray light to signal another day. The mine was waiting, and so was the world above, both demanding more than you had to give. Dawn broke with a gray light that barely deserved the name. You woke to the creak of the cottage, the wind rattling the thin walls, the faint smell of smoke and damp wool. Your body protested as you moved, every muscle stiff from yesterday's labor, every joint creaking like the mine's timbers. You didn't want to get up, but the mine didn't care about want. It demanded. You pulled on your boots, the leather cracked and cold, and grabbed your pail. If there was food, a crust, a spoonful of cold oats, you ate it standing, chewing fast to get it over with. The walk to the pit was the same blur of frost and mud, your breath clouding in the air, your steps heavy with dread. The mine was there, waiting, its dark mouth open like it knew you'd come back. Down in the tunnels, the air was heavier today, or maybe it just felt that way. The damp clung to your skin, the cold sank into your bones. You checked your lamp, its flame a weak protest against the dark, and started swinging. The pickaxe felt heavier, the coal or more stubborn. Some days the earth gave up its treasures easily. Others, it fought like it had a grudge. Today was the latter. You hacked at the seam, each strike jarring your arms, your back, your will. The dust was thicker, coating your throat, making every breath a chore. You coughed, spat, kept going. Stopping wasn't an option, not with the Talaman's ledger waiting. The mine had its own sounds, a language you learned without wanting to. The drip of water, steady as a heartbeat. The groan of timbers, warning of pressure above. The distant clatter of a cart, the muffled curse of another miner. You listened for the bad sounds, the crack of splitting rock, the hiss of escaping gas. You'd learned to trust your ears more than your eyes. The dark hid too much, but sound didn't lie. A creak could mean a collapsing roof. A silence could mean a dead canary. You kept one ear open, always, even as your body moved through the motions of work. If you were a hewer, you spent your day at the coal face, cutting and prying, your body bent into shapes it wasn't meant for. The low tunnels forced you to crouch, your knees grinding, your neck aching from the constant stoop. If you were a hurrier, you were on your hands and knees, dragging a sled loaded with coal through passages so tight your shoulders brushed the walls. The strap around your forehead dug into your skin, the weight pulling at your spine. Women and children did this work, their smaller frames a cruel advantage. You'd see a girl, no older than 10, hauling a load heavier than she was, her face blank, her hands raw. You didn't look too long. It hurt too much, and you had your own load to carry. The mine wasn't just a place. It was a thief. It stole your strength, your health, your years. You saw it in the older miners, men in their 30s who looked 60, their backs bent, their lungs rattling. They didn't talk about retirement. There was no such thing. You worked until you couldn't, and then you hoped someone would take you in, a wife, a child, a neighbor who owed you a favor. Most didn't make it that far. A cave-in, a blast, a cough that wouldn't stop. Any of them could end you. You didn't dwell on it, but it was always there, like the dust in the air. The company owned more than the mine. It owned you. If you lived in a company village, your house, your food, your life belonged to them. The rent was deducted before you saw your wages. The store took the rest. If you were lucky, you broke even. If you weren't, you owed them, and they never let you forget it. Some miners tried to fight back, talking of unions or strikes, but it was dangerous. The company had spies, and a loose tongue could get you blacklisted, your family turned out into the cold. You kept quiet, kept working, kept your anger buried deeper than the coal. The animals underground were your strange companions. The ponies, stubborn and silent, pulled carts through the wider tunnels. They were born for the dark, their lives as trapped as yours. You tossed them a bit of bread when the foreman wasn't looking, a small act of defiance against the mine's cruelty. Rats were less sentimental. They'd steal your lunch, gnaw your boots, scurry over your feet in the dark. You didn't kill them unless you had to. They were survivors like you, and there was a grudging respect in that. The canaries were different. Their song was a lifeline, their silence a warning. You'd glance at their cage, hoping for a chirp, dreading the stillness that meant run. Breaks were rare and never long enough. You'd sit on the cold ground, your back against a timber, and eat what you had. The bread was hard, the water tasted of metal, but you didn't care. It was fuel, nothing more. You'd listen to the others, their low voices swapping stories of small victories. A rich seam, a day without a fall. No one talked about the big things, the fears, the men who didn't come back. That was bad luck, and luck was all you had. You'd finish your meal, wipe your hands on your trousers, and pick up the axe again. The whistle would blow soon, and the tallyman didn't wait. The end of the shift was a small mercy, but it came with its own price. The climb to the surface was torture, your body screaming with every step. The cage rattled, the ladder creaked, and the light above grew closer but never fast enough. When you emerged, the world felt alien. The air was too clean, the sky too wide. You'd squint, cough, try to shake the dust from your hair, but it was part of you now, like the ache in your bones. The walk home was a blur, your feet moving by habit, your mind still in the tunnels. At home, the fire was a faint comfort. You'd wash if you could, scrubbing with cold water, the dust clinging stubbornly to your skin. Supper was the same, pottage, bread, maybe an onion if the garden hadn't failed. You ate in silence, the weight of the day pressing down. Your children might chatter, your spouse might ask a question, but you didn't have much to say. The mind took your words, too. You'd sit by the fire, staring into the flames, feeling the warmth that never quite reached your core. Sleep was coming, but it wasn't rest. It was just a pause, a brief escape before the mind called you back. The night was restless, your sleep broken by the mind's ghosts. You'd wake to a cough, a creak, or just the weight of your own thoughts, the dark of the cottage feeling too much like the tunnels below. You'd lie there, listening to the wind claw at the walls, the faint snores of your family, the crackle of a fire long gone out. Your body begged for rest, but rest was a luxury, like meat or a dry pair of boots. Dawn came anyway, gray and unforgiving, pulling you back to the world. You rose, every bone protesting, and dressed in the same clothes, stiff with dust and time. The mind was calling, its pull stronger than hunger, stronger than fear. The walk to the pit was colder now, the ground harder, the air sharp enough to sting your face. You saw the others, their shapes familiar but worn, moving toward the mine like moths to a flame they couldn't escape. No one looked up, no one spoke, but there was a shared weight in the silence, a kind of grim understanding. You lit your lamp, its flicker a faint defiance, and descended. The cage or ladder took you down, the air growing thick, the dark closing in like a fist. By the time you reached the bottom, your breath was short, your mind already on the seam waiting for you. Today, the mind felt heavier, its mood sour. Maybe it was the damp that clung to the walls, turning the floor to muck. Maybe it was the gas, faint but there, making your lamp's flame waver. You checked it twice, heart thudding, and moved on. The pickaxe was an old enemy, its weight familiar but never welcome. You swung, the shock of each strike running up your arms, into your spine. The coal ore gave way slowly, grudgingly, as if it knew you'd be back tomorrow. Dust filled the air, coating your tongue, your eyes, your lungs. You coughed, a deep, rattling sound that didn't stop and kept swinging. The mine was a world of its own rules, unspoken but ironclad. You didn't waste energy on talk, didn't linger on breaks, didn't look too long at the kids hauling sleds or the women bent under their loads. You respected the old-timers, not for their age but for their survival. They'd outlasted cave-ins, blasts, and the cough that took most. You'd see them, faces carved from coal dust, moving slow but steady, their picks finding the seam like they could smell it. They didn't offer advice, but you watched them anyway, learning the small tricks, how to brace a timber, how to spot a bad roof, how to breathe shallow when the air turned bad. Danger was a constant companion, closer than the men beside you. The mine didn't just threaten, it promised. A loose rock could fall, bruising your shoulder or cracking your skull. A gas pocket could ignite, turning the tunnel into a furnace. You'd heard of mines where the air itself exploded, the blast tearing through shafts, leaving nothing but ash and silence. You didn't think about it, not directly, but it was there, in the way you checked your lamp, the way you listened for the canary, the way you froze at every unfamiliar sound. The mine taught you to fear without panic, to work through the dread, to keep moving even when your gut screamed to run. The women in the mine were as tough as the men, maybe tougher. They hauled coal, sorted, or worked the pumps, their hands as raw, their backs as bent. You'd see them, hair tied back, faces smudged, moving with a quiet strength that shamed the foreman's shouts. They didn't complain, not because they couldn't, but because it didn't matter. The mine didn't care about gender, only output. Some women worked above ground, washing or attending the lamps, but many were below, crawling through tunnels too tight for men, their sleds heavy with coal. You'd nod to them, a small acknowledgement, but you didn't talk. Words were for the surface, where the air was kinder. The children were the hardest to watch. Boys and girls, some barely old enough to tie their own boots, scurried through the dark, carrying tools, hauling baskets, or trapping, opening and closing ventilation doors to keep the air moving. Their hands were small, their eyes big, their bodies too frail for the work. You'd see a boy drop a load, hear the foreman's shout, and look away. Helping meant risking your own quota, your own wages, your own family's bread. The kids learned fast, their faces hardening, their childhoods buried under coal dust. You didn't think about your own children doing the same. You couldn't. The mine didn't leave room for that kind of thought. The machinery, where it existed, was a mixed curse. Steam pumps kept the water at bay, but they broke down, leaving you knee-deep in muck, bailing with buckets while the deputy cursed your slowness. The cages were faster than ladders, but their cables frayed, their gears jammed. You'd heard of cages plummeting, men crushed before they could scream. You didn't trust the machines, but you used them because the mine didn't give you a choice. If you worked the winding engine, you were lucky, above ground, cleaner air, but the responsibility was heavy. One mistake and the cage could drop, the pump could fail, the mine could flood. You didn't sleep well on those nights. By midday, your body was a map of pain. Hands bleeding, back screaming, lungs burning. You'd stop for a bite, sitting on the cold floor, your lamp casting long shadows. The bread was stale, the water warm and gritty, but you ate because you had to. The others were quiet, their faces dim in the flickering light. Someone might mutter about a bad seam or a broken tool, but no one spoke of home, of hope, of anything outside the mine. It was bad luck, and the mine was jealous. You'd finish, stand, and swing again, the rhythm pulling you back into its grip. The shift's end was a faint light in the distance. Not the sun, but the promise of air, of space, of a world that didn't crush you. You'd gather your tools, check your load, and join the slow march to the cage or ladder. The climb was brutal, your legs trembling, your breath short. The surface was a shock. Light too bright, air too sharp. You'd cough, spit black, and start the walk home, your body heavy, your mind numb. The village was there, waiting, its small sounds a faint comfort. You'd eat, wash if you could, and sit by the fire, its warmth a lie that didn't reach your bones. Sleep was close, but the mind was closer, its shadows already creeping into tomorrow. The morning was a thief, stealing the little rest you'd scraped together. You woke to the same cold, the same creak of the cottage, the same ache that had settled into your bones like a permanent guest. Your cough was worse today, a deep rasp that shook your chest and left a metallic taste in your mouth. You ignored it. The mind didn't care about your health, and neither could you. You dragged yourself up, pulled on your clothes, now more dust than fabric, and grabbed your pail. If there was anything to eat, it was meager. A scrap of bread, a sip of weak tea if the fire had been kind. You didn't savor it. You ate to move, to face the pit that waited like a judge. The walk to the mine was a ritual of dread, the path worn smooth by years of boots and resignation. The air was raw, cutting through your thin coat, stinging your knuckles where the skin had cracked. The other miners were there, their faces blurred by dawn's half-light, their steps as heavy as yours. No one spoke. Words were too costly this early, and what was there to say? The mine loomed ahead, its timbers framing a darkness that felt alive, hungry. You lit your lamp, its flame small and defiant, and descended. The cage rattled, the ladder groaned, and the earth swallowed you whole. Down below, the mine was a beast with a bad temper. The air was thick, heavy with damp and dust, the walls slick with water that never stopped seeping. You checked your lamp, its light barely cutting through the gloom, and started your work. The pickaxe was a cruel partner, its weight dragging at your arms. Each swing a battle you couldn't win, only endure. The coal or resisted, clinging to the earth like it knew its worth. You hacked, pried, cursed under your breath. The dust was everywhere, a living thing that coated your skin, your lungs, your thoughts. You coughed again, harder, and kept going. The Talaman's shadow was always near. The mine's hierarchy was carved into every tunnel. Hewers like you, if you were one, were the muscle cutting the seam with skill earned through pain. Hurriers crawled below, their sleds scraping the floor, their breaths sharp in the tight spaces. Deputies prowled, checking timbers, sniffing for gas, their eyes sharp for slacking. Above them, the overman ruled, his voice a whip that didn't need to strike to hurt. You stayed in line, not out of loyalty but survival. A wrong word, a missed quota, and you'd be in the lowest shafts where the air was poison and the roof whispered collapse. The mine was a community, but not a kind one. You knew the others by their scars, their coughs, their silences. There was Sarah, who hauled coal faster than most men but never looked you in the eye. Old Will, whose hands shook but whose pick never missed. The new lad, barely 15, who flinched at every sound and wouldn't last the month. You didn't bond, not really. The mine didn't allow it, but you watched out for each other, in small ways. A warning about a loose rock, a shared sip of water, a hand to steady someone who slipped. It wasn't friendship. It was necessity, the only thing keeping you all from breaking. Danger was the mine's heartbeat. You felt it in the creak of timbers, the faint hiss of gas, the sudden stillness when the canary stopped singing. You'd seen what happened when the mine turned cruel. A cave-in that buried a crew, a fire that left only bones, a flood that filled a shaft faster than men could scream. You didn't talk about it, but you carried it in the way you checked your lamp, the way you listened for the roof's groans, the way you prayed without moving your lips. The mine didn't just kill. It wore you down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to take. The machines were no kinder. If your mine had them, they were as likely to betray you as help. The steam pumps roared, keeping the water out, but they jammed, leaving you bailing with buckets, your boots soaked, your hands numb. The cage was a lifeline, but its cables were old, its gears temperamental. You'd heard of cages dropping, of men crushed in an instant. You didn't trust the winding engine, didn't trust the men who ran it, didn't trust anything but your own hands and the pick they held. If you worked above ground, tending the engine or sorting, or you were luckier than most, but the mine's shadow still reached you. Its dust still settled in your lungs. The children were a wound you couldn't close. You'd see them, small and quick, darting through the dark with baskets or tools, their faces already losing the softness of youth. Some were trappers, sitting alone in the black, opening doors for air to pass, their world reduced to a single task. Others hauled coal, their backs bent, their hands bleeding. You'd hear a child cry out, tripped or struck by a foreman's stick, and you'd grit your teeth. Helping meant risking your own work, your own family's survival. You hated the mine for that, for making you choose between your heart and your hunger. By afternoon, your body was a ruin. Your hands were raw, your back a knot of fire, your lungs heavy with dust. You'd stop for a break, if you could call it that, sitting on the cold ground, your lamp a dying star. The food was gone, bread, cheese, whatever you'd packed, eaten fast, without taste. You'd drink from your flask, the water stale but necessary. The others were there, their faces dim, their voices low. No one spoke of tomorrow, of dreams, of anything beyond the next swing. The mine didn't allow hope. It allowed endurance, and that was enough. The whistle's cry was a small salvation, signaling the shift's end. You gathered your tools, checked your load, and joined the others heading up. The climb was a punishment, your legs trembling, your breath ragged. The cage swayed, the ladder tested your grip, but you made it always because you had to. The surface was a shock, light that burned, air that cut. You coughed, spat black, and started the walk home, your body heavy, your mind numb. The village was there, waiting, its small sounds a faint comfort. You'd eat, wash if you could, and sit by the fire, its warmth a faint lie. Sleep was waiting, but so was the mine, its call already pulling you back. The night was a shallow grave, offering no real rest. You woke to the same darkness, the cottage cold and creaking, your cough sharper now, each hack pulling at your chest like a hook. The air tasted of ash and worry, but you pushed it aside. The mine didn't wait for you to feel ready. You rose, dragging yourself up, joints cracked, and pulled on your clothes, the fabric stiff with cold dust and despair. Your pail was near empty, a rag, crusty bit of bread, maybe a bit of cold broth if you were lucky enough for someone to have saved it. You ate standing, swallowing fast, the food a means to an end. The mine was out there, its hunger louder than yours. The walk to the pit was a grim sentence you'd serve daily. The cold bit deeper today, clawing through your coat, numbing your fingers. The other miners were there, their faces blurred by dawn's half-light, their steps as heavy as yours. No one spoke. Words were too costly, and what was there to say? The mine didn't care. The mine loomed ahead, its timbers framing a darkness that led you felt alive, hungry. You lit your lamp, its flicker a faint defiance, and descended. The cage rattled, the ladder's rungs were cold, and the earth swallowed you whole. Down below, the mine was a beast with a bad temperament. The air was thick, heavy with damp and dust, the walls slick with water that never stopped seeping. You checked your lamp, its light barely cutting through the gloom, and started your work. The pickaxe was a cruel partner, its weight dragging at your arms. Each swing a battle you couldn't win, only endure. The coal or resisted, clinging to the earth like it knew its worth. You hacked, pried, cursed under your breath. The dust was everywhere, a living thing that coated your skin, your lungs, your thoughts. You coughed again, harder, and kept going. The Talaman's shadow was always near. The mine's hierarchy was carved into every tunnel. Hewers like you, if you were one, were the muscle cutting the seam with skill earned through pain. Hurriers crawled below, their sleds scraping the floor, their breaths sharp in the tight spaces. Deputies prowled, checking timbers, sniffing for gas, their eyes sharp for slacking. Above them, the overman ruled, his voice a whip that didn't need to strike to hurt. You stayed in line, not out of loyalty but survival. A wrong word, a missed quota, and you'd be in the lowest shafts where the air was poison and the roof whispered collapse. The mine was a community, but not a kind one. You knew the others by their scars, their coughs, their silences. There was Sarah, who hauled coal faster than most men but never looked you in the eye. Old Will, whose hands shook but whose pick never missed. The new lad, barely 15, who flinched at every sound and wouldn't last the month. You didn't bond, not really. The mine didn't allow it, but you watched out for each other in small ways. A warning about a loose rock, a shared sip of water, a hand to steady someone who slipped. It wasn't friendship. It was necessity, the only thing keeping you all from breaking. Danger was the mine's heartbeat. You felt it in the creak of timbers, the faint hiss of gas, the sudden stillness when the canary stopped singing. You'd seen what happened when the mine turned cruel. A cave-in that buried a crew, a fire that left only bones, a flood that filled a shaft faster than men could scream. You didn't talk about it, but you carried it in the way you checked your lamp, the way you listened for the roof's groans, the way you prayed without moving your lips. The mine didn't just kill. It wore you down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to take. The machines were no kinder. If your mine had them, they were as likely to betray you as help. The steam pumps roared, keeping the water out, but they jammed, leaving you bailing with buckets, your boots soaked, your hands numb. The cage was a lifeline, but its cables were old, its gears temperamental. You'd heard of cages dropping, of men crushed in an instant. You didn't trust the winding engine, didn't trust the men who ran it, didn't trust anything but your own hands and the pick they held. If you worked above ground, tending the engine or sorting, or you were luckier than most, but the mine's shadow still reached you. Its dust still settled in your lungs. The children were a wound you couldn't close. You'd see them, small shadows in the dark, hauling coal or tending doors, their eyes too old, their hands too small. A girl might stumble, her sled too heavy, and you'd look away, your own quota a chain around your heart. A boy might cry, struck by a deputy's stick, and you'd clench your jaw, knowing help could cost you everything. The mine made you complicit, forcing you to choose survival over mercy. You hated it, but hate didn't fill bellies or pay rent. By afternoon, your body was a wreck. Your hands were raw, your back a knot of fire, your lungs heavy as stone. You'd stop for a break, if you could call it that, sitting on the cold ground, your lamp a dying star. The food was gone, bread, cheese, whatever you'd packed, eaten fast, without taste. You'd drink from your flask, the water stale but necessary. The others were there, their faces dim, their voices low. No one spoke of tomorrow, of dreams, of anything beyond the next swing. The mine didn't allow hope. It allowed endurance, and that was enough. The whistle's cry was a small salvation, signaling the shift's end. You gathered your tools, checked your load, and joined the others heading up. The climb was a punishment, your legs trembling, your breath ragged. The cage swayed, the ladder tested your grip, but you made it always because you had to. The surface was a shock, light that burned, air that cut. You coughed, spat black, and started the walk home, your body heavy, your mind numb. The village was there, waiting, its small sounds a faint comfort. You'd eat, wash if you could, and sit by the fire, its warmth a faint lie. Sleep was waiting, but so was the mine, its call already pulling you back. The morning was a cold slap, dragging you from the thin sleep you'd clawed out of the night. Your cough was a constant now, a deep, grinding rattle that left your chest tight and your throat raw. The cottage was no refuge, its walls thin, its air heavy with damp and the ghosts of yesterday's labor. You rose, every movement a pain, a fight against your own body, and pulled on your clothes, ragged, dust-caked, smelling of sweat and coal. Your pail held little, a crust, maybe a smear of fat if luck was kind. You ate fast, not tasting, just fueling the machine that was you. The mine was waiting, its call a chain around your soul. The walk to the pit was a march through a world that didn't care. The cold was sharper, slicing through your coat, numbing your fingers until they felt like someone else's. The other miners were there, shadows and trudging through the gray dawn. their faces carved from exhaustion. No one spoke. The mine didn't want your words, only your work. The mine's entrance gate loomed, a mouth that never closed, framed by timbers, framing a darkness that felt alive, hungry. You lit your lamp, its flame flickering like a lie, and descended. The cage groaned, the ladder bit your palms, and the dark took you in, heavy and complete. The mine was a living thing today, its mood foul. The air was thick, damp, and sour, the dust so dense it seemed to move with purpose. Water seeped from the walls, turning the floor to sludge that sucked at your boots. You checked your lamp, its light a faint rebellion, and swung your pick. The coal or ore was stubborn, each chunk a battle, each swing a theft from your strength. Your arms ached, your back burned, your cough tore at you, but you didn't stop. The tallyman was watching, his ledger a judge that never slept. The mine's order was unyielding. Hewers like you, if that was your role, were the heart, cutting the seam with a precision born of pain. Hurriers crawled through the low tunnels, their sleds heavy, their breaths sharp and small. Deputies moved like wolves, checking timbers, testing air, their eyes cold. The overman was a shadow above, his will law, his anger a storm you didn't tempt. You kept your place, your pick moving, your thoughts buried. A wrong move, a slow day, and you'd be sent to the deepest shafts, where the air was a blade and the roof a threat. The mine tied you to the others, not by warmth but by shared weight. You knew them by their marks. Mary, whose hands were as scarred as any man's. Tom, whose cough was wetter than yours, his days numbered. The girl, new and silent, who hauled coal with eyes that didn't blink. You didn't talk, didn't laugh, didn't dream together. But you helped where you could. A nudge to steady a slipping load. A whisper about a bad seam. A shared glance when the foreman turned away. It was less than friendship, more than nothing. A thin thread in the dark. Danger was the mine's breath. In every creak, every hiss, every silence. The timbers groaned. The canary faltered. The air itself could turn to fire. You'd seen the mine's hunger. Men crushed, burned, drowned. Their names fading like smoke. You carried their weight. Not in words, but in the way you moved. Careful but quick. Your lamp checked. Your ears sharp. The mine didn't just end lives. It ground them down, stealing your breath, your years, your light. You worked through the fear, not because you were brave, but because stopping meant starving. The machines were no friends. Pumps fought the water but failed too often, leaving you bailing, your boots rotting, your hands numb. The cage was a trap, its cables fraying, its creaks a warning you couldn't answer. You'd heard of cages falling, of men gone in a heartbeat. If you worked the engine or sorted or above ground, you were spared the worst, but the mine's reach was long, its dust in your throat, its shadow in your sleep. You trusted nothing but your pick, your hands, the rhythm that kept you alive. The children were a scar on your heart. You'd see them, small and quick, hauling coal or tending doors, their faces hard, their hands bleeding. A boy might stumble, a girl might cry, and you'd look away, your quota a chain you couldn't break. The mine made you choose, your family's bread or a moment's kindness. You hated it, hated yourself, but the mine didn't care. Took their youth, their softness, their futures, just as it took yours. By midday, your body was a wreck. Hands raw, back broken, lungs heavy with dust. You'd sit, if you could, on the cold ground, your lamp dim, eating what was left. The bread was gone, the water stale, but it was enough to keep you swinging. The others were there, their faces faint, their voices low. No one spoke of home, of hope, of anything but the work. The mine was a thief of dreams, leaving only the next swing, the next load. You stood, wiped your hands, and went back to it, the rhythm a cage of its own. The whistle was a thin mercy, calling you up. You gathered your tools, checked your load, and joined the slow climb. The cage rattled, the ladder tested your strength, but you made it. The surface was a shock. Light too harsh, air too clean. You coughed, spat black, shook the dust from your clothes, but it was you now, woven into your skin. The walk home was a blur, the village's sounds distant. You'd eat, scrub what dust you could, and sit by the fire, its warmth a lie that didn't reach your core. Sleep was close, but the mind was closer, its shadows already pulling at tomorrow. The night was a thief, stealing what little peace you might have found. You woke to the cottage's chill, the air heavy with damp and the echo of your cough, now a harsh, tearing sound that left your chest burning. The darkness felt like the mine itself, pressing close, unyielding. You rose, every muscle a knot of pain, and pulled on your clothes, tattered, stiff with dust, more a second skin than a covering. Your pail was nearly empty. A scrap of bread, perhaps a cold lump of porridge if someone had thought to spare it. You ate quickly, mechanically, the food a necessity, not a comfort. The mine was out there, its pull a weight you couldn't shake. The walk to the pit was a grim procession, the cold slicing through your coat, biting at your hands, already cracked and raw. The other miners were there, ghosts in the dawn's faint light, their steps heavy, their faces blank. No one spoke. The mine didn't need your voice, only your body. Its entrance loomed, a black scar framed by weary timbers, the earth's hunger plain in its depths. You lit your lamp, its flame a weak spark against the void, and descended. The cage creaked, the ladder tested your grip, and the dark swallowed you, as it always did. The mine was a beast today, its breath foul, its mood heavy. The air was dense with dust and damp, the walls slick with water that pooled in the muck at your feet. You checked your lamp, its light barely a whisper, and swung your pick. The coal or ore was unyielding, each strike a fight, each chunk a grudging surrender. Your arms were lead, your back a fire, your cough a constant companion, ripping through you with every breath. The dust was a living thing, coating your lungs, your skin, your soul. You spat, the black stain a mark of the mine's claim, and kept going. The Talaman's eyes were never far. The mine's laws were carved in stone and silence. If you were a hewer, you worked the seam, your body bent, your hands bleeding for every basket filled. Hurriers moved below, their sleds scraping, their breaths small in the tight tunnels. Deputies watched, their lanterns sharp, their voices sharper. The overman was a distant god, his will absolute, his wrath a shadow you didn't dare cross. You stayed in your place, your pick a metronome, your thoughts locked away. A mistake, a slow shift, and you'd be sent to the deepest levels, where the air was a curse and the roof a threat that never slept. The mine bound you to the others, not by choice but by shared suffering. You knew them by their wounds, Jane, whose fingers were as gnarled as the timbers. Sam, whose cough was a death knell, his eyes already fading. The boy, new and frail, who wouldn't see winter. You didn't speak of it, didn't share dreams or fears, but you helped in small ways. A warning about a shifting rock, a shared crust, a hand to pull someone from the sludge. It was survival, not sentiment, a fragile pact against the mine's indifference. Danger was the mine's rhythm. In every groan of timber, every flicker of your lamp, every pause in the canary's song. You'd seen its cruelty. Men buried under rock, burned by gas, lost to water that rose too fast. You carried their memory, not in words but in caution, in the way you checked the air, listened for the earth's complaints, moved with a care that wasn't cowardice but necessity. The mine didn't just kill. It consumed, taking your strength, your breath, your years, until you were less man than machine, built for its purpose. The machines were no kinder than the earth. Pumps battled the water, but they broke, leaving you bailing, your boots sodden, your hands numb. The cage was a risk, its cables worn, its groans a promise of betrayal. You'd heard of cages falling, of lives ended in a heartbeat. If you worked above ground, tending engines or sorting, or you were luckier, but the mine's shadow was long, its dust in your throat, its weight in your sleep. You trusted only your pick, your hands, the rhythm that kept you moving. The children were a wound you couldn't heal. They moved through the dark, small and quick, hauling coal or tending doors, their faces carved with a hardness no child should know. A girl might stumble, her load too much. A boy might flinch under a deputy's shout, and you'd look away, your own quota a chain around your heart. The mine made you choose, your family's survival or a moment's mercy. You hated it, hated the choice, but the mind didn't care. Took their youth, their hope, their hands as it took yours. By midday, your body was a ruin. Hands bleeding, back screaming, lungs heavy as coal. You'd sit, if you could, on the cold ground, your lamp a faint glow, eating what remained. The food was gone, bread, dust, whatever you'd brought, swallowed without joy. The water was stale, gritty, but it kept you alive. The others were there, their faces dim, their voices faint. No one spoke of the world above, of love or light. The mine was all there was, its hunger endless. You stood, wiped your hands, and swung again, the rhythm a cage you couldn't escape. The whistle's call was a faint reprieve, pulling you toward the surface. You gathered your tools, checked your load, and joined the climb. The cage rattled, the ladder mocked your strength, but you made it. The light was a shock, too bright, too sharp. You coughed, spat black, shook the dust from your hair, but it was part of you woven into your being. The walk home was a haze, the village's sounds a murmur you barely heard. You'd eat, scrub the dust that clung, and sit by the fire, its warmth a lie that didn't reach your bones. Sleep was near, but the mine was nearer, its shadows already claiming tomorrow. The morning was a blade, cutting through the fragile rest you'd stolen from the night. Your cough was a beast now, clawing at your chest with every breath, leaving a taste of iron and dust. The cottage offered no warmth, its walls trembling in the cold, its air thick with the stale scent of coal and despair. You rose, your body a map of pain, and pulled on your clothes, worn to threads, heavy with the mine's mark. Your pail was a mockery, a crumb of bread, perhaps a sip of watery gruel if the pot hadn't run dry. You ate without thought, the food a grim necessity, not a pleasure. The mine was calling, its voice louder than your hunger, heavier than your fear. The walk to the pit was a sentence carved in frost and mud. The cold was a living thing, gnawing through your coat, freezing your fingers until they were stiff as the timbers you'd soon face. The other miners were there, shadows in the dawn's cruel light, their steps slow, their faces hollow. No one spoke. The mine didn't care for words, only the work you'd bleed for. Its entrance waited, a dark maw framed by sagging beams, the earth's hunger plain in its silence. You lit your lamp, its flame a faint defiance, and descended. The cage groaned, the ladder bit your hands, and the dark claimed you, as it always would. The mine was a predator today, its air thick with menace, its walls weeping water that turned the floor to a treacherous mire. The dust was a plague, swirling with every swing, burrowing into your lungs, your eyes, your soul. You checked your lamp, its light a dying ember, and lifted your pickaxe. Each strike was a war, the coal or resisting, each chunk a theft from the earth and from you. Your arms were fire, your back a shattered thing, your cough a relentless thief. You spat black, the stain a badge of your sentence, and kept swinging. The Talaman's ledger loomed, a judge without mercy. The mine's order was a chain, binding you to its will. If you were a hewer, you carved the seam, your body twisted, your hands raw for every load you won. Hurriers crawled below, their sleds grinding, their breaths sharp in the choking tunnels. Deputies stalked, their lanterns cold, their voices colder, hunting for weakness. The overman was a specter, his authority a weight you couldn't lift. You kept your place, your pick moving, your thoughts small and hidden. A falter, a weak day, and you'd be cast to the deepest shafts, where the air was a blade and the roof a promise of burial. The mine wove you to the others, not by choice but by shared ruin. You knew them by their marks. Liz, whose eyes were dim but whose hands never slowed. Ben, whose cough was a death sentence, his strength fading. The boy, new and trembling, too soft for this hell. You didn't speak of it, didn't share hopes or losses. But you helped where you could, a warning about a shifting wall, a shared sip of water, a hand to pull someone from the sludge. It was survival, not kindness. A thin rope in a pit of despair. Danger was the mine's heartbeat. In every creak, every hiss, every silence. The timbers groaned, the canary faltered, the air could ignite in a heartbeat. You'd seen its hunger, Men crushed, burned, drowned, their names lost to the dark. You carried them, not in words but in the way you moved, cautious but driven. Your lamp checked, your ears sharp. The mind didn't just kill. It consumed, stealing your breath, your years, your light, until you were a shadow of yourself, shaped for its work. The machines were no salvation. Pumps fought the water, but they failed, leaving you bailing, your boots rotting, your hands numb. The cage was a gamble, its cables frayed, its creaks a threat. You'd heard of cages plummeting, of lives snuffed out in a moment. If you worked above ground, tending engines or sorting, or you were spared the worst, but the mind's reach was relentless. Its dust in your lungs, its weight in your dreams. You trusted only your pick, your hands, the rhythm that kept you alive. The children were a wound that bled fresh each day. They moved through the dark, small and frail, hauling coal or tending doors, their faces hard, their hands torn. A girl might fall, her sled too heavy. A boy might flinch under a deputy's blow, and you'd look away, your quota a chain you couldn't break. The mind forced you to choose, your family's bread or a moment's mercy. You hated it, hated yourself, but the mind was deaf to hate. Took their youth, their dreams, their bones, as it took yours. By midday, your body was a wreck. Hands bleeding, back screaming, lungs heavy as stone. You'd sit, if you could, on the cold ground, your lamp a faint glow, eating what was left. The food was gone, bread, scraps, whatever you'd carried, swallowed without taste. The water was gritty, warm, but it kept you moving. The others were there, their faces dim, their voices low. No one spoke of home, of hope, of anything but the work. The mind was a thief of dreams, leaving only the next swing, the next load. You stood, wiped your hands, and went back to it, the rhythm a prison of its own. The whistle was a faint mercy, calling you to the surface. You gathered your tools, checked your load, and joined the climb. The cage rattled, the ladder mocked your weakness, but you made it. The light was a shock, too bright, too sharp. You coughed, spat black, shook the dust from your hair, but it was part of you, woven into your being. The walk home was a blur, the village's sounds a distant hum. You'd eat, scrub the dust that clung, and sit by the fire, its warmth a lie that didn't reach your core. Sleep was near, but the mind was nearer, its shadows already claiming tomorrow.